I'm Dr. Amara Sohail. Our topic today is ongoing disruption in UK. The UK is facing the worst disruption in decades since the outbreak of far-right anti-immigrant violence. That started following the loss of 3 innocent lives in Southport. The knee-jerk response was Islamophobia due to the calculated misinformation that the perpetrator was a Muslim. The Islamophobia then turned into xenophobia, fueled by far-right hooligans and extremists. To discuss that, we have in our studios today Dr. Sohail Qureshi, who is a psychiatrist, a journalist and an entrepreneur, and Dr. Saeed, who is a consultant urologist in London. We also will be joined by 2 guests via video links, Dr. Shahid Latif from Leicester, and a very special guest, Naomi Green. Naomi Green is a policy and public health officer at BIMA, that is British Islamic Medical Association. Formerly a senior genetic technologist, after completing her PhD in sociology and social policy, she actually is serving as a lecturer and a researcher in Islamophobia, the Muslim community and integration. Thank you very much, Naomi, for joining us today. We would like to know your views on the recent disruption in UK and Northern Ireland, and also tell us about how your meeting went with the Irish Prime Minister.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, it's been a very worrying time, I think, across the UK, but particularly here in Northern Ireland. Given the small size of the community, there's only 11,000 Muslims in the whole of Northern Ireland. So we're very connected as a community. And so whenever the disorder broke out, I think there's a lot of anxiety, particularly among women and children, about where is safe to go. And a lot of worry about the initial police response. But alhamdulillah, the police have been quite good since, but it has been a very anxious time. And on Thursday, we went to visit Stormont, which is where the local assembly in Northern Ireland is held. And we met with the First Minister of Northern Ireland, Michelle O'Neill. And I must admit, we sat through the debate in the chamber in which they discussed the recent spate of Islamophobia and specifically highlighted it was Islamophobic racism and xenophobia. And we were really reassured to hear time and time again in the chamber condemnation of that, and particularly recognition of the important work that many in our community do within the NHS, healthcare workers, doctors, nurses and other professionals, and just as a wider community, that we are welcome here in Northern Ireland. It was very, very important to hear that.
And are you satisfied with the government response to these violent attacks? Because from the images we see that Northern Ireland was one of the worst hit areas in UK.
Yes, so I think the initial response from Westminster was very, very disappointing, and I think it was very slow. And I think here there was a delay, maybe of a day or two before it got very bad here. And we've had now 5 nights of disorder. Last night a masjid was attacked, but certainly we didn't see the riots last night that we had seen on previous nights. So it has been quite bad, and that has created a lot of anxiety, particularly as they've been quite spread out, not just in one area. And because the community is small, many people may be the only Muslim family or one of only a few Muslim families in their areas, which makes them feel particularly vulnerable. But we've also had quite a good community response. We've had, I've heard, just speaking to a sister just yesterday, and her neighbour had come with sweets to say, you're welcome. And so there's been beautiful moments like that as well.
And as you mentioned, that it's no longer just an Islamophobic issue, it is now turned into xenophobia as well. And you mentioned that Muslim communities are the most vulnerable. And apart from the support from the government, what are the measures taken in order to make sure that they can live their normal life without fearing for their lives or their properties or, society in general?
Well, I think very strong condemnation across the board was very important. We met with across community, so all the different parties in Northern Ireland met with us on Thursday morning, and they all did come out and condemn the violence in particular. But I think the wider rhetoric and narratives also had to be condemned, and we were very pleased to see parties from different people from different parties to do that. Also, we've had a very strong response from the police. They have been, we haven't had the same convictions, unfortunately, here as in England, where they've been fast tracking. They haven't done that here. But the police have been working hard to increase their presence, improve their communication, and also that we are starting to see now those arrests being made, even if slightly after the time. And other places like the unions, the Labour Relations Union, and the hospital trusts now are beginning to respond as well, and other employers, to ensure the safety of the Muslim population here and other minority populations here.
And why do you think what is the reason for this difference in the response from the government in mainland as opposed to Northern Ireland? What do you think is the reason?
I think part of it has been we haven't been, I don't think any community has been silent, but as a community we've been able to leverage how, for such a small community, our impact is probably disproportionate to our size. One of the leading cardiologists in Northern Ireland was the late Dr. Mazhar Khan, who was a cardiologist. And he, there's been others throughout the years who have made a lasting impact in the society in Northern Ireland itself. So we are important, and I think that has been reflected in some of the response, to be honest. But also there has been a great community push from a lot of our allies and friends who don't want this in their name, and they have also been very loud. And today there's a rally in Belfast. 161 different organisations have come together to say this is not what we want to see in Northern Ireland. And I think those kind of responses, those allegiances have been very, very important, and they've been built over a number of years. And we've been able to lean into those over the past couple of days, and that's been incredibly important.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is, despite the disruption that we are seeing, one positive thing from this is that we have seen the communities united against these aggressive behaviors. Do you think that the police has made arrests of these hooligans in Northern Ireland?
I think the trouble in Northern Ireland, we have an additional layer here of our history. There has been conflict, and there has been allegiances also, unfortunately, between some of the far right elements from England, Ireland, and those local paramilitary groups, which has until now made it difficult. So there has been attacks previously on mosques and on individuals and on houses. That has not been dealt with. And on BMCA, which was a mosque here. And we've seen that slow police response. It didn't go away because we ignored it. It's really important that it is acknowledged, that it's named, that Islamophobia, xenophobia, racism is recognised and not downplayed, which I think happened in the past. So what we've seen over the past 5 days is a complete change. From the first night that there was rioting, there were fires being set in front of the police, because the police have had traditionally a stand back, deal with later. They were filming people, and they've changed that now to be a lot more proactive. When something happens, to be on the ground. They've actually brought over 150 police officers from Scotland in order to have a more robust response, and we've really seen that over the past few days, and I think that has made a big difference, having those prosecutions, both in terms of prevention, people don't want to be arrested, but also in terms of reassuring the community that we are visible and that we matter. And I think that's been very important as well.
We have seen a serious damage to the properties and businesses. Do you think that government is going to offer some compensation to these people? Because of course these small businesses, if they lose them, then of course it will take ages for them to stand back on their feet again? Has government
So
promised anything?
the government has promised some funding. There will be some funding because of the nature of the damage. And there also has been a community fundraiser that has raised over 100,000 for the 7 businesses initially who were burnt out, however, or attacked. However, I think there's a wider problem because all the businesses in the area, so all the takeaways and barbers and that were owned primarily by Muslims and other ethnic minorities, they had to close, so they've lost hours of business. So that is a little bit more of a discussion that has to be continued, because the loss of business that is maybe not as tangible as arson attack or having a window smashed, because it wasn't safe for them to open. So that's something we did raise on Thursday, and there was a group of businessmen who also were at the chamber, who also were raising these issues. And I do think it's something that they will consider, given the extent of the violence and the reasons why those businesses weren't protected and why people didn't feel safe at the time.
Yeah. And what about the children in school? Do you think there is more vulnerability, especially parents worrying for their children's safety?
Yes, I think one of the things, so a lot of the focus has been on the violence, but there's also been so-called peaceful protests, and some of them have been quite large. Personally, my area where my children go to school, I have never had any issues as a Muslim, but there was a very large protest in that area, and a lot of the people were young. And I'm thinking particularly of my daughter. She wears hijab, she's in the secondary school, and in September she's going to be returning to school, and some of those children who may have been at the protest, or their parents or their brothers were at that protest, will be going to school with my child. So we actually, as a collective, separate from any organisation, a collective of Muslim mothers, there's about 400 women, have come together. We're actually drafting a letter to the Department of Education, the Minister of Education here, to request that all schools have something in place in September to ensure that our children are safe on buses, that our children are safe outside their schools, inside classrooms, and that children who have been exposed to these really damaging narratives about Muslims, that there's maybe something in place to de-radicalise them, because they have been radicalised by the likes of, the far right, and I'll not name these personalities, but there needs to be a system in place that our children can be safe.
Yes, so Naomi, we know that one of the purposes of these violent hooligans is to create a sense of fear in the communities. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, do you experience that people are actually really worried and anxious and fearful?
I think particularly on the first day, because the footage we watched, businesses, the Muslim community is very small, so there's a small number of halal shops that everyone, even you would travel into Belfast to go to these shops. And we were watching the footage of people going from shop to shop, breaking windows, shouting awful things, and then setting fire to some of those businesses. So there was that first night in particular, a real fear. What's next? What's next? And so we've created our own groups within our communities. We've got safe taxi drivers that we know we can trust, these brothers who can act as a taxi service. We have an alert group, so we know an area that something might have happened, that we know, okay, that we don't go there today. So we've been organising within our community to ensure that we are safe. So we're more organised, and that has made us feel maybe a little more safe along with the police response. But I must admit, that first night, I think a lot of people were worrying what happens next.
Okay. And Naomi, as the public affairs officer at BIMA, which is British Islamic Medical Association, have you taken any special measures to support the communities in Northern Ireland?
Yes, I must say the team at BIMA have been incredibly active on a national level. I mean, I've obviously spoke about my own local area, but from the very early days we were thinking, how can we respond? We have a support email where people can phone in for pastoral support. We've also released a statement advising hospital trusts, employers, how could they best protect their staff. And I know certainly locally, the Labour Relations Union and different trusts did take that on board in terms of how they would support staff, such as changing hours and this kind of thing. And also yesterday we wrote to the Prime Minister to ask that he takes Islamophobia seriously. And I think it's really important that Islamophobia is recognised. It's not just the faith alone. There is a racialisation. If you're a Muslim, there's a lot of assumptions made, regardless of your race, regardless of your background. And I think Islamophobia as a UK-wide needs to be understood as a form of, it is a form of racism, because Muslims are treated as if they were a race, even though we're not. We come from very different backgrounds, and some of us, like myself, are white. But we are treated as one group, essentially, by these people. And as a form of hate, I think there has to be a lot more done at that national level. I mean, it's very big, and the motion in the Assembly, the local Northern Irish Assembly, was passed, and it named Islamophobia. And I would love to see that on the national level, when we have hate preachers, essentially, like Douglas Murray, on our BBC and on our screens, who are talking about Muslims in these awful ways, and that's been normalised. And you wouldn't see that for any other group. And I think we need to change how Islamophobia is recognised and how Muslims are talked about in the UK.
Naomi, apart from yourself, you mentioned that especially the Islamic community is very small in Northern Ireland, and so are the other communities. Do you see any leadership from these communities that are helping you to support all those people who feel vulnerable, or it's not a great response?
The Muslim community leaders?
Muslim as well as other communities?
Yes, so there are 17 different Muslim organisations, small, very small, some of them, and they came together for the first time in the same room to meet with the police. So there's been a lot more coordination, perhaps, than in the past. There's also been a lot of social justice groups and anti-racism groups who have walked alongside us and have rushed to support us. So that's been very important from the wider Northern Irish community. So I think those organisations have been key. But I think particularly for Muslim women, Muslim families, the organisation, the unofficial, shall we say, the informal organisation that we have among ourselves, our WhatsApp groups and things like that, have also been vital in the response and how we have reacted to these riots and these scenes that we've had over the past few days.
We just hope that these disruptions, they stop in the near future. But of course, it has happened, and these bad people or these far-right groups, they will still exist. So do you think that there is a need for any forward planning in case this kind of situation arises again in future? Do you think you will take special measures now, having faced what has happened in the last few days?
Absolutely. I think these narratives they've been around for a long time. And in the past, when we raised them, we were told, certainly locally and I think nationally as well, it's just a few extremists, it's nothing important, it's just, don't ignore them. Ignoring doesn't work. We need to have a robust response to people who are preaching hate. They are preaching hate against Muslims. This is the reality, and social media has played a big part in that. There's been a lot of, when we discussed this with the police, they suggested that a lot of the narratives are coming from outside the UK, such as America, and these networks often it's very highly organised, and that is new, I think, compared to previous incidents. However, it's also the maybe more polite and subtle forms of Islamophobia that have been allowed to permeate society through much of the mainstream media, through some of our mainstream radio, mainstream newspapers. So people have heard these narratives day in, day out. And I think that needs to change. But I don't know that there is a willingness to tackle that at the national level, at governmental level. Obviously, there are many people on the ground and many organisations on the ground who have been saying this has to stop, this has to change, but we need something from the top to say, you know, we cannot continue to incite against the Muslim community and minority communities and migrant communities. They're such an important part of our society. They're not some separate part of society that we can blame all our problems on, but very much part of our society. And that's going to be a slow process, and it's going to be a difficult process, but it requires willingness from the top.
Yeah, of course. So what message will you give to your Muslim and other communities in case similar situations come in future? What is your message to all the communities in Northern Ireland as well as in UK?
I think unite and collaborate. I think those collaborations have been so important. It's very easy for even in any society or any group to stick with people you know and your small communities, but in joining together there's strength. And there are many differences between us as a Muslim population of the UK, different ethnicities, different languages, different cultures, but having to be united as much as possible in the message on condemning Islamophobia and demanding our rights. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for equal equity, you know, in society. So using our voices to speak up, say we cannot put up with this, but also uniting as one voice to make that voice stronger.
And a message to the government?
I think the British government needs to be more robust. It needs to call this out very clearly as Islamophobia, xenophobia. It needs to challenge that polite form, or Baroness Worsley described it as Islamophobia has passed the dinner table test, and that was in 2011, and it very much has stayed on the table ever since. And I think we need to begin to challenge more robustly the kind of views that underpin and have allowed the most extreme messages to be shared, which has culminated in this awful violence and attacks that we've seen across the UK. And until we deal with the root cause, it's going to be very difficult to progress.
Thank you very much, Naomi. One last question, and you don't have to answer if you don't feel right. Did you face any change in people's behavior in the last few days, or did you face any kind of situation of violence to yourself or your family?
I didn't personally experience any violence. Islamophobia is something I have personally experienced here in the past quite a lot. So I have been on local media. So I have had a couple of comments online, quite unpleasant things, but nothing in person, thankfully, alhamdulillah. But I was in the library. I work from home, so I was in the library checking something, and someone come and gave me a little bun and said he was a Christian and he was really sorry that this was happening in his name. So there's been some good things as well. But I do, I have friends that have had things directly. So it's something that's been quite close to home. I have friends whose doors were put in and windows were attacked. So it's been quite close, but alhamdulillah, in my particular house is safe, and where I've been has been safe. So
thank you very much, Naomi. And we can only hope that with your efforts, along with the support from other community leaders, all the communities, they are united and they are able to stand together in case of similar disruptions in future. Hopefully not, but of course we have to be prepared for that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Have a nice day. So Dr. Qureshi, you heard Naomi's views on the situation in Northern Ireland and what they are doing in order to reduce the sense of fear in the community. What do you think is happening in UK overall, and are you satisfied with the current support from the government and the situation, how it's going?
I think it's a very serious issue, and if it is not tackled with the swiftness, with the sensitivity, and with the seriousness it deserves, it will shake the foundation of United Kingdom. and this beautiful society that we have. It is a very sinister movement, and which has already disrupted the entire social society's life, basically. People all over the country are worried, whether they are Muslims, non-Muslims, white, black, brown, or whatever color you call. Islamophobia is the new anti-Semitism. We have to push forward. Just like anti-Semitism was bad and it's criminal, similarly, Islamophobia should also be banned in the same way, with the same vigor, by the government. What is strange is that how this entire narrative against, very xenophobic narrative against the foreigners or immigrants, or then it went on to Islamophobic, and was allowed to fester for such a long time. And we have media personnel who are actually opinion makers. They were allowed to spew venom, actually, and they continued to spread rumors, a narrative which was totally false. And the other thing that I find it very strange, the majority of these violent riots, they are in the impoverished areas of the country. So there is economic forces in action. And what is again surprising is this, that the poor, disadvantaged youth, white youth, are far right, and I feel sympathy for them because they feel so aggrieved actually to come forward and express their frustration and anger in this way. And they may have certain points, but the way they express them, that is what makes it very, very vile. So on one hand, we have very impoverished population, white population, going against ordinary shopkeepers, the taxi drivers, the nurses, and those people they just find on the streets. Interestingly, all the rich people, whether they are white rich people or whether they are black rich people or the Muslim rich people, they live in the mansions, they live in different areas, and they are untouched.
But is it because they are not that exposed to the outside community, that's why they are protected?
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, that it's the economic factors which are making people to fight against one another. And this is the financial crunch that has been going on, so to say, the austerity of the Tory government for the last 13, 14 years, which has brought us to here. But there are many different perspectives of the situation. If this is not tackled well, although Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has done quite a good job, but I think it needs a little bit more of an iron fist than it is right now. Because if it continues and Muslims and the non-whites feel alienated, it will affect the economy of the country. And what are they expecting? If they start, these far right, if they start attacking the Muslims and the non-white people in the UK, what do they expect? The people, other people in the world, they'll keep quiet, whether they'll be safe when they go into the Muslim countries or non-white countries?
I agree with you, Dr. Qureshi, that our current Prime Minister has taken very positive steps to protect the communities. But you mentioned earlier on that Islamophobia should be dealt with just like anti-Semitic measures that government previously has taken and currently is taking. So do you think that there is discrimination there, or there is discrepancy in how they deal with the two different situations?
I mean, apparently it looks like that, but I don't think it is like that, because unfortunately our Jewish fellow citizens or Jewish people have been persecuted for a very long time. Throughout the history, for about 2,000 years or more, they have been persecuted. They had 400 years slavery in Egypt, which the Prophet Moses brought them back to Canaan, and then at different programs all over the Europe, whether they were Spain, Portugal, England, France, so everywhere, and Germany, as we see. And this was only after 6 million Jewish people were exterminated in a very brutal manner, that the world actually woke up, and then they realized, and rightly so, that anti-Semitism of any shape and form should be banned. So now the question is this, that we are coming back to the same kind of a circle where Islamophobia is coming up as a one issue of a protected characteristic. And then do we have to wait for millions of people to die before we make Islamophobia as anti-Semitic? So I think it is a time to think and reflect. Generally people, they don't like thinking because that is difficult. That's what they judge. So we have to change that narrative.
And as you mentioned that these extremist, aggressive groups or violent people, they are targeting, unfortunately, the less privileged socioeconomically people from a lower socioeconomic status, if I can say that. Do you think that this will create fear amongst the communities, or do you think that that will cause more hatred in them? Because, of course, the aftermath of all that is happening is going to have a lasting effect. So how are we going to tackle that?
There are some lessons to be learned, and I must say that I really feel proud to be British, because the way our Prime Minister came in, very strong and stern warning, and the law enforcement agencies, they did a great job and they suffered a lot of casualties. And then we have started seeing the results of those prosecutions. Some people have started getting sentenced. So that's really good. At the same time, one would say that there's more needs to be done. I was hearing your conversation with Naomi Green, and I think people who are suffer economically, whose shops or houses or cars or property were damaged, they should be somehow compensated by the government. There should be more strict measures to stop it, but we have to go to the root cause. It is the financial advantageous situation for these people in different areas that must be looked into. It is easy to externalize blame. It is easy to say that far right are bad and all that. But frankly speaking, some of their issues are very justified as well.
You're absolutely correct, because there is a lot of frustration in the community in general.
Yeah.
And I mean, this in the British society, we are, as you rightly said, that we are very proud to be British, because in this country, everyone has got a right to have these peaceful protests, to voice their concerns. And we have seen that there is recession going on, people are struggling, the cost of living has gone up. But how the far-right protesters have, how they have brought their voices up is not the right way, because that has caused more, anger and wastage of these buildings and businesses. Clearly, they have to be heard, but at the same time, not this way. This was absolutely not the right way.
So you raised a very important point earlier about the role of social media and the media in general. And I think that the role of media, the mainstream media I'm talking about, and some of the personalities, it was very negative. And they were really promoting hate. They were promoting this xenophobia, Islamophobia. And we're not talking about the ordinary people. We're talking about highly intelligent, articulate, and people of influence who are the opinion makers. And I feel that they have some psychopathic tendencies, because they knew exactly where it is going to. It is the Germany of the 1930s, just before the pogroms started and the rise of Nazis. And one of the major components was the media, because the media started making huge and wrong statements about the Jewish people. And over a period of time, the entire community rose up, and there was nobody to save that very tiny community. We live in London, and majority of the non-whites and the British Muslims, they live in, and British Pakistanis, they live in the major cities or in the areas where there's a great kind of density. However, what about those non-whites or British Muslims who live in the far-flung areas where there's only one or two household or families in the sea of the white people? And I would also urge the British white population that this is not an issue of a minority. This is an issue for entire society. They must come forward in drones, and they should come up and show the solidarity, exactly like what Brighton has shown, what Walthamstow has shown, what Birmingham has shown. And you could see that was a big slap on this far-right narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, Dr. Qureshi, about the role of media. Of course, the media needs to play a more positive role to show the citizens that these immigrants, they are not a burden on the society. Because if you see in every field, we see contribution from the doctors, the nurses, and businesses. You know, there are a lot of these non-white, you can call them immigrants. They are actually, they've got big businesses and they are supporting the economy. So absolutely, you're absolutely correct that media needs to play a very important role to change the face of this Islamophobia or xenophobia, as we have seen in the last few days.
I think there's lots of wrong assumptions. I think one assumption is there's the illegal. I think the moment they say illegal immigrant, the connotation is very negative.
Yeah.
Actually, according to the international law, anybody can seek asylum anywhere, and that is protected by the universal law, the human rights, and the UK law. So in essence, there's nobody illegal. Yeah. That is very, very wrong. And that is what we need to also tell people, that people who have run away from the wars and traveled and traversed the seas of the world, many got killed. They need our sympathy.
Absolutely. And, you know, I was just reading a few comments. Of course, negativity leads to negativity. And there were some comments from people, their narrative is that if UK or US want to slow the immigration, they should stop interfering in the politics of their countries, because all these people who are seeking asylum or immigrating are because of the economic disruption in their homelands. And if everyone is at peace, then this situation will not arise. So joining us now is Dr. Shahid Latif from Leicester, who has got a very close eye on what is happening on the north of UK. So thank you very much, Dr. Latif, for joining us. So please tell us what is happening in your surroundings.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amara, and thank you once again to QuewsNews for raising and bringing up this very, very topical, most important debate. I think it's really, really important. I mean, we are all seeing in the media where things are at this current time, and it's very sad to see that the country where we live is going through what it is at this moment. And when I pick up some of the issues which are being discussed, a lot of that points towards people like me, because I'm British, I'm Pakistani descent, I'm a Muslim, and I identify with all of these. And this very concept of what's happening at this current time, even if it's in the guise of immigration, is very sad and very anxiety-provoking for a lot of people. So we see this all over. We know for a fact that that majority of the people in the UK, be they indigenous or non-indigenous, are very peace-loving, tolerant people. We know that, having lived, many of us being born here, many of us having spent a number of years here, having come and adopted this country, we know it's an extremely, extremely tolerant country. And then we have a number of people. When I say number, a handful, I say that as a handful, and I think I use that word on purpose, because that doesn't take away the fact that a lot of people, including myself, including I'm sure you, Dr. Qureshi, and other people, do have their concerns around immigration and how immigration does take place. But I think the way this whole issue has been twisted towards an Islamophobic agenda is frightening. And I think it's important that we pick this up and really retake the narrative and the rhetoric as to how we need to. It's our responsibility to bring this forward. I mean, the whole concept, if we think about it first, Islamophobia, it's an irrational fear of hostility and fear and hate towards Muslims. And we need to accept, and if we go back to the psychology, the whole concept, there were colonial powers for hundreds of years, for centuries, who dehumanized colonies. And, we do believe in the concept of epigenetics, and this does come forward. And for many people, some of the very elements, the characteristics of racism and the sense of superiority does lead to the concept of Islamophobia. And why are people Islamic phobic? Why are they racist? The whole thing about the in-group, the out-group, that I have to hang around with my own. I'm going to be quick to judge. I have to blame others. And so personal insecurities, these actually lead to some of the factors which we are seeing at the moment. And Dr. Qureshi is very right in highlighting that this is only a certain part, a segment of communities which bring this forward, and this basically dilutes the bigger picture. And the bigger picture that we have here is that we are all facing the same challenges: the financial crunch, immigration, the movement, open borders, etc. And we have to talk about these and discuss these together. Many of us on this group were either born here or came to this country as skilled professionals. And what we have offered in this country, the country in a lot of ways, all of us, most of us being doctors who are present here, the NHS would have collapsed many, a few decades ago if it wasn't for us. And many of these individuals who do end up rioting with this very violent behavior and acts, etc., do end up going to the A&E being injured. And the irony of it is they are treated and managed by people like you and me, or professionals and doctors like you and me. So there's the irony. But I think there's a few things I think we really need to be thinking about, that we are not the other. We are part and parcel of this community. No matter what individuals think, no matter how they put things forward, we are not the other. We are very, very part
because
of this
our
community.
Second generation children, they find it very odd with what is happening in the country, because to them, this is their homeland. And why should be treated differently when their contribution to the society is very positive? So I think this kind of disruption that we have seen more towards the north of UK, not only that we have seen these very upsetting images, but at the same time we have seen the societies coming, the communities coming together as well. So do you think that there is a lot of unity? People have been united when they started facing this disruption in the country?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is. I mean, we've seen in the media how people have come together. And although you've mentioned second generation, actually we've got our fourth generation at this current time. In the Black and Asian community, people came here, in the 50s and the 60s. So many of professionals would have come at different stages. Some would have come during the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and our children are second generation. But we also have third and fourth generation for those individuals and those Asians, South Asians and Far East and Africans, Arab, etc., who came 50s and 60s. So they have grandchildren and great-grandchildren who are being brought up here. So very much part of the British fabric. So, this is not, this is not immigration. This is Britishness. And I think absolutely your question around, particularly outside of London in the north, where the majority, you see lots of cities and towns and villages where you have people from ethnic backgrounds in majority, you'll see this. I would actually urge all those who are, from non-Indigenous population and non-white, is don't get stuck into this and do not pass personal attacks. And I would also urge that whatever the right-wing writers, the violence they are perpetrating, they actually want a response, because we are then going to become an easy target for the media. We're going to become an easy target for people who already have question marks. At this current time, they have shown the worst in British society. You see this when I was growing up in London. We were fearful of going to football matches because we saw this kind of thuggery behavior, and there was a target against Asians and blacks. But we are now seeing this more open. So no personal attack should come from outside, and we should be brave enough to go out there. People like yourself, people like Dr. Qureshi, who've been so vocal, and with programs like this, we need to go out there and start asking questions. We must not get defensive. We must start asking questions. We must avoid myth busting, because there's no myths about it. We have some very, very clear, contrasted, shared values which we are able to share. And the other thing that is very, very important that I really want to highlight about retaking or reinstating the narrative, and that is, let's start talking about immigration and tell these right-wing that what is their agenda, because their agenda, well, the theme is the same as ours, but our agenda is different. Our agenda is that the Britishness about us is that we want to talk about immigration in the right way, like any other country. And it's rightly so. But I don't think that is their agenda.
And I mean, of course, like disruption on one side, but how we have seen the communities coming together. Do you think that it is the role of our community leaders to come together and actually voice all the concerns and the positive steps the communities should take in order to integrate with the society where they are not taken as others?
Dr. Amara, if there's any other time that needs to be done, it's now. It is the responsibility of leadership to come to the fore, be that in the political arena, be it in media, be it with professionals, be it as community leaders. This is the time for us to come together and offer a hand of peace for our Britishness. And I think that's the message we need to give repeatedly, that, this is the Britishness about us. We may be a different color, but our thoughts and our vision around making Britain great again is just like any other one from an indigenous population. But these challenges which come about, like any person from the UK, we would challenge these hands-on. We would challenge these rhetoric and these narratives, because they are nothing but toxic. And these have been perpetrated by individuals who I define as dividers. So we need to name and shame who these dividers are, and assure that we are people of tolerance, of peace, and progression.
Absolutely. And do you think there is a need for more representation from Islamic as well as other communities in the parliament? Because I'm sorry to say, but the role of our parliamentarian who represent these ethnic groups has not been very positive, and I would say the word hopeless. So do you think there is need for more people to come forward and join politics or the social groups in order to change the impression that immigrants or these foreigners, they are disruptive to the society rather than more productive?
Absolutely. Leadership needs to be up there. We need to have more representation in positions of influence so that we can represent what is being targeted at this current time. But I would also like to stress that Islam and Islam Muslims have been, not so flavor of the month for a number of years now. We are a target now. So this is, although it's about Islam at this current time, a racist will be a racist, a prejudiced will be a prejudiced, someone who discriminates will be discriminating. If you remove Muslims from the equation for now, they will then target other people of color. They will target other people who they see as different for them, because their objective is not to bring peace, not to look for any solutions. These are personal insecurities. People, as Dr. Qureshi has rightly said, are from certain strata of life, who have nothing better to do. So this is their opportunity to come out and showcase the worstness of British society. And I'm really proud. I'm really proud of the current government, sitting government. I was a bit skeptical, if you like, when the Labour government, its leadership came in. But it's how the Prime Minister has tackled this hands-on. We need to be seen to be working hands-on, and this is where our leadership needs to come to the fore.
Absolutely. And also, I think there is a major role our Islamic or these religious clerics can play to educate the societies by, especially in the prayers and all that, because this is what I think we should be looking forward to, rather than just demonstrating their religious practices and all that, because it's not going to change their image. There is need for more positive role of all the Muslim as well as non-Muslim societies if we want to integrate with the British white people.
To add there, and Dr. thank you very much for your kind words and a word of wisdom. I think rather than we making it just Islamophobia and xenophobia, I think this is an issue of humanity. This is a human rights issue. This is the issue of the entire society, because we have our own hue and color, but the most important thing is that this is not an isolated issue that should be dealt with some community. As they say, the injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. So the society has to really come forward and to feel that this is what is needed, basically, that the society needs to be cohesive, and they have to, and the people everywhere need to stand up, because you cannot allow a very handful of people to take over the entire narrative, entire country as a hostage. And that is where Keir Starmer and his government have just stood up, but I think more needs to be done in there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Qureshi and Dr. Latif. So let's ask Dr. Saeed, working in the hospital, and we have seen the disruption in the communities, but did you see a sense of fear amongst the non-white staff members in the hospital? Do you think that people didn't come to work because they felt vulnerable, that they could be attacked?
Mara, thank you very much for having me on the show, and a lot of related stuff has been already said and listened to by our previous guests. Coming to the hospital, I mean, hospital has been traditionally a very protected environment, and going to and from work, maybe I may feel more vulnerable. However, once I'm in the hospital environment, I feel very secure and very protected. And likewise, there has been concerns shown by the colleagues, but to my knowledge, there has not been anybody calling in, not coming to work because they're feeling vulnerable or they need support from the hospital authorities in this manner. And I've not heard about any families related to the hospital doctors that may have been affected by these riots.
So the hospital, I know where you work, it's the center of a lot of Muslim as well as non-white communities. Did you see that people were angry about, I mean, that includes the patients, angry about what was going on around them? Because there's a vulnerability, their properties and their businesses, they were actually targeted?
Well, I mean, the thing is that being a professional, it is not really right to talk to the patients as to how they feel about the general situation. But generally, I feel that there is a sense of retaliation amongst common people against these riots and against this disruption and violence. There is how they perceive, and I sort of agree with that as well, is this is terrorism in its purest form, that these very small minority of right-wing extremists are terrorizing vulnerable people. I mean, a lot of these ethnic communities, not only Muslims, all the colored people living in the UK, they are now third and fourth generation people. And after the second generation, most of their identity from where they came from is all usually lost. And by the third or fourth generation, the people are generally integrated into the system in a way that they feel themselves as a productive citizen of the society that they're living in. To my knowledge, in all these years that I've been here in the country, there's never been a instigated terrorism attack to this level where all the Muslim or ethnic communities will come out, demonstrate against other people and start burning their properties, start destroying their properties and start looting their properties. None of these ethnic minorities have ever done that. So where is the terrorism?
Yeah, that is true, but then it's not worldwide. We see that there's so much unrest going on due to wars or other reasons, recession and so on and so forth, and COVID played a major role. On a different note, so you mentioned that you have not experienced any sense of retaliation within the staff members in the hospital, but did your management show any sign of support to the staff members if they felt vulnerable, any support groups or something like that?
There has been some support from the higher management, and I think they're obliged to do that anyway because they know that 80% of the workforce in the UK hospitals is from not actually British, they're immigrated or adopted British citizens, and they're not really white British citizens as one would expect. So they're aware of it, and they have a very kind and sympathetic view towards whatever is happening, and there have been emails from the executives saying that if you feel vulnerable, if you need help, we will be prepared to provide help to you.
Yeah, that's good to know, because I think we are seeing a lot of support not only from our hospital management, but at government level as well. So thank you very much, Dr. Saeed, Dr. Qureshi, and Dr. Latif and Naomi for joining us today. So viewers, you heard the deep sentiments of our guests. It is good to know that despite the harrowing scenes of the wanton destruction by a bunch of hooligans in various parts of the country that we have seen on media, the British civic society has risen up against extremism. And we have seen that the non-white population, including Muslims, have shown a great resolve as a united front. We feel proud to be British and will continue to be one voice, one community. Thank you very much for watching the show. So goodbye for now. We'll be back with another show.